For our speaker today, I have the wonderful honor to to introduce our teammates, one of our teammates from the Maryland Food Safety Network, Carol Allen from the University of Maryland. Carol is also an agent associate in the Department of Plant Science and Landscape Architecture, and she helps farmers in Southern and Western Maryland reach their food safety goals. Carol's a PSA trainer and holds a master's degree in plant science with a concentration in plant pathology, plant viruses, and integrated pest management. So Carol, go right ahead, take it away.
All right, thanks, Angela. First of all, in accordance with the policies of the University of Maryland College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, it is vital that all people are assured of their rights and responsibilities and be informed that the University of Maryland is committed to a policy of non-discrimination. And furthermore, the University of Maryland is in accordance with the policies of non-discrimination as set down by federal law and the U.S. Department of Agriculture civil rights regulations and policies. So now on to what we're going to talk about. So as Angela said, water risk assessment, we're going to talk about inspection of water distribution systems and try to get a good handle on some of the issues that can arise and how we can handle with them. Now, I have been joined by Alex Lorenka, Administrative Officer 3 in the Food Quality Assurance Program of Maryland Department of Agriculture, and Christopher Walsh, Professor Emeritus in the Food Safety section of Plant Science Department, also my boss. So this is a collaborative effort, so hang on, all right? So why do we talk about food safety at all? All right, we want to eliminate hazards in foods. Consumers should have the right to have safe food. And a hazard is something that can cause harm. We can talk about biological hazards, chemical hazards, and physical hazards. Today, we're going to zero in on biological hazards. So in particular, we're going to focus on enteric pathogens. So you all have had the experience of going to a restaurant, all right, and afterwards didn't feel so hot. You probably came in contact with one of these foodborne pathogens. There are a few others, but these are the top four. Noroviruses, E. coli, particular E. coli 0157H7, Salmonella, and Listeria. Now, normally they're a mild illness. You get intestinal distress, diarrhea, vomiting, gut pain, really bad. But it's serious. In serious cases, it can go into reactive arthritis, hemolytic uremic syndrome, chronic kidney disease, miscarriage, neurological disorders, or even death. So this is something we A, want to avoid, and B, want to avoid again, because it can be very serious. In general, 1 in 6 Americans are estimated to get sick from foodborne illnesses every year. 48 million people, that's 48 million people. 128,000 hospitalizations and can be 3,000 deaths are the statistics on that. So this is serious that we want to prevent it. So that's 48 million people. 128,000 hospitalizations and can be 3,000 deaths are the statistics on that. So this is serious that we want to prevent it. So on the farm, we think about areas of cross-contamination. Definitely transportation, all right, can be an issue. Compost, particularly uncovered compost piles. You can get runoff that will go into the fields or applying compost that's not properly processed. Wildlife, definitely. Workers, Dr. Henley discussed worker training last month. This is a very important role in preventing cross-contamination. And then in the packing house, look at that dump tank. Improperly maintained dump tanks can be a source of cross-contamination. And then kind of improper handling in the field too. All of these bins are stacked. So whatever was on the bottom of this bin is going to be on the fruit of that bin. So that's something we have to think about. So we're going to focus on the 4 W's, and these are the areas where contamination most likely can occur. In particular, we talked about workers last month. We'll talk about water, wildlife, waste, and today we're zeroing in on water. So how do we use water on the farm? It's definitely irrigation, fertigation. Any of the foliar sprays, from pesticide to growth regulators to thinning compounds for the people in apple and peach orchards right now, maybe. Frost protection, those strawberry folks, you definitely use that this year. And as we go into the hotter months towards the end of strawberry season, evaporative cooling. So frost protection, evaporative cooling, a lot of times those are overhead irrigation, and that can be something to think about. In harvest and post-harvest, we have hand washing, all right, ice making, definitely washing of harvest tools, post-harvest equipment, and washing and cooling the produce. So as we know, water can serve as an ideal environment, not only for microbial growth, but also microbial movement. So gets you both ways. As I pointed out earlier, there are numerous opportunities for microbial contamination on the farm, things that we have to control. So the steps you want to take are reduce your risk, which we're going to talk about today. You want to know your water source, choose your application method, and test your water. So today we're going to talk about reducing your risk and a little bit about water source. Next month, we're going to talk about application method and testing your water. So there we go. I have to refer to my notes because I had collaborators here. They're great. All right. So we're going to walk you through a water use risk assessment. And this is the process of evaluating the different types of water use on your operation. As you can see here, you've got bin washing. So what water quality do we need for that? And you've got single pass washing for greens. So that's another use that we need to think about. Let me make sure. All right, so we need to know that the produce safety rule does not specifically require a risk assessment. However, it does imply it, all right? And it does that in the produce safety rule 112.42, where it talks about identifying any conditions that are reasonably likely to induce known or reasonably foreseeable hazards into or onto covered produce or food contact surfaces. So harmonized GAP does require it, as does MDA GAP. And this is the kind of thing that would fit very nicely into a farm food safety plan. So let's talk about that a little bit. Your assessment should take into consideration definitely your water sources, and you may have more than one source depending on the use. Your source in the packing house may be one type of water, well or municipal, whereas in your field you might be using surface water or a high volume well. So have to think about all of those sources. Your method of application and your timing of application also will configure greatly in deciding what water source will work. And of course, your crop's grown. So it's altogether possible that you will have different qualities of water being applied to the crop and to produce. And in all cases, we're talking about produce that may be consumed raw, but at different times in its production could be different qualities. It's not that confusing, and we've got a really good way of organizing it. So the first thing you're going to do is think about all of the different sources that you have in your operation. It could be municipal, it could be, use my laser pointer, it could be municipal, it could be groundwater, as in a well, or it can be surface water. And although I don't like the looks of that pond, it could actually be pretty good. Only testing would know. Then you want to, you want to list these things because you're about to get them organized. Then you want to list all of the activities that you do. Here, of course, is backpack spraying. You've got, again, bin cleaning, and now you've got washing and cooling of produce. And you want to organize them. I really like this table. So what you're going to do is list all of those activities that are pre-harvest on your farm, okay, on your farm, your operation, all of those activities that are harvest activities, and then what do you do for post-harvest, all right? So we're going to be evaluating the risk factor based on when it's used as an agricultural activity. And then we're going to think about the water quality required for each one of those uses. So your pre-harvest use may require the same or allow a different water quality standard than post-harvest use, and again, depends on crop cycle, crop, when you're using it and how you're applying it. And then we can bring it all together in this chart. And I think that this is just really, really, really snazzy. So list your activity. And in this example, we're going to talk about irrigation for kale. And this farmer has elected drip irrigation, and there's a reason for that. His source is pond number 1, and you may have more than one pond, which means that when it comes down to deciding your water source, you want to enumerate or describe your ponds, because you may use one for the first part of the season, but then as the season wears on, maybe you tap into pond number 2 because pond number 1 is now low volume or whatever the reason. So you will have to look at all of your different ponds. So activity, source, outcome of risk assessment. So in this case, this farmer has directed a non-direct contact with the edible portion of the crop, and he's going to use that up to 1 week prior to harvest. He's elected drip irrigation, so even though he's using a surface water, that gives him a low to moderate risk factor. So the water needed here would be no more than, and my screen gets blocked. I hope I can move this. Oops, well, guys, sorry. My little insert blocked some of my slide. So you want generally no more than, I think it's 100 colony forming units of generic E. coli per 100 mLs for any single water sample. And he's taking the conservative side of no greater average than 126 colony forming units. With the no contact, he could go up a little bit higher, but he's taking the conservative, and that's really, really good. Just a note on water testing for this for GAP certification, you'd be taking a sample at first use, peak use, harvest, and then just determining an arithmetic average. The produce safety rule has not finalized their decisions on water averaging and number of samples, so we're just going to go by GAP for this discussion. So you can see if you take this chart and enter every different kind of use and every different kind of source, you're going to get a handle on your risk for each type of use and source. Now, produce safety rule and GAP are going to want you to keep records. And my collaborators at MDA found this 3-part PDF. It's published by United Fresh, and Angela is going to put this URL in the chat box. It is an interactive PDF so that you can actually enter numbers. You may probably want to reconfigure it so it's more applicable to your operation, but I think this is workable. It asks all the right questions, so take a moment and take a look at that. All right, now, so before we go on, do you have any questions, any thoughts, any comments? We could actually take a minute and take 1 or 2 questions. Angela, how are we looking? Angela has left me.
No, I'm here. No, I'm just monitoring the chat. We don't have any questions as of yet.
Okay. All right, you guys, now I'm anticipating that you've got questions, because I don't know about you, but I love to have this as we all meet in one room. So I'm relying on you guys to interact. So that's your job. All right, so let's go on and talk about water distribution systems. So part of a water risk assessment is going to be looking at the distribution systems. You've already got the idea that different uses are going to employ different systems on your farm. You're going to have a separate system for your packing house. You may have separate systems for hydroponics for sure. And this is a really complex fertilizer injector system. Don't ask me how to use it, all right? I'd have to go back to the farmer. So the bottom line is that as we go through this, you're going to want to look at every individual aspect of the system. All right, so let's take a look at some possible water uses and their source. So here we have a spring, and it is enclosed by, looks like maybe a cinder block or a stone spring house. All right, and we're going to be putting that into a tank, all right, which is going to feed a sprayer. And it looks like they're spraying on raspberries early in the season because I don't see much leaf. So what do you think? Is this low risk, high risk? How do you qualify a spring even though it's enclosed, is that groundwater? Is that surface water? These are things to think about. We're actually going to get into springs a little bit later on. All right, let's take a look at another system. Here we've got a pond. So we've got surface water. It's going through a sand filter here, and it's feeding into this drip tape. All right. So again, low risk, high risk. What is your water source? What does that bring to the table? How does your sand filter affect its potability? Not its potability. Its relative microbial populations. And then, of course, we're using a very low risk drip tape. Things to think about. All right, here we go. We've got, in this case, we've got a high volume well. You can hear the pump on a high volume well is external. Notice that they've got that in an enclosure. All right, and I'm going to mention enclosure, not enclosure, a little bit later on. And it goes through a distribution apparatus that I'm not familiar with. Maybe Angela on the shore knows these better than I do on the Western Shore. And it goes into a type of boom overhead irrigation. And it looks like this crop is close to harvest. So what's your source? What's your risk here? Things to think about. So when you do, you start to think about your water distribution system. You want to make a map. Now here is a Google Earth or a Google map that's been captured, and the farmer has overlaid its water systems, and notice it has the distribution. It's got a pond here, but it's got that distribution line and into the field. It's got, maybe we can say that green might be a well for the packing house. You've got another small pond here, and it goes off here. So you want to take this, bring it into a PowerPoint or another kind of program where you can overlay lines and forms, color them, color code them. This is a great time to also put your sources of possible contamination, like a fuel tank or other storage tanks of things that you want to keep track of. Here we've got the distribution system in a packing shed, and they have used the blueprint as the origin. So you want to do a written description, you want to do a map description, and all of these things are going to help you keep track of potential issues, potential areas of contamination. Yeah, I think I covered everything. Looking at my notes from Alec, thank you. So map your permanent fixtures, wells, holding tanks, valves. All right, those are areas that you want to keep track of. Indicate your flow. And you want to think about in your written description, what is your control on all of these inputs? And that's going to help you determine risk. Also, your degree of protection and land use adjacent to the use and upstream. I'm going to be touching on that later. And look and speculate on the likelihood of contamination before the water reaches your farm. Now you've got a really good handle, either with the map and the written description, as to where you might have risk. All right. So you're going to be looking at all kinds of junctions and uses and areas. I'm not going to go detail by detail, but we could later if we had more time, but we don't. So I'm going to talk about, but I am going to say, this is a wellhead. You notice something very missing, like the well cap? Not good. All right, so your maps don't have to be fancy. They don't have to be superimposition on a Google Earth. It can be a simple sketch. Here we have our well. We've got a backflow preventer, yay. All right, and our line diverts there. We've got it going into, I don't see it, but you guys see it, a simple hydrant at the packing house. Then you've got your flow, and he's indicated flow, all right, as it goes through this. I'm presuming this is an orchard or very large broccoli. So you can see it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be a simple sketch. Having the blueprint is great, but in the packing house, you can see where this person has indicated their well. They've got a water distribution system with, they've got a chlorine injector. They're using injection for the blue line, which goes to the restrooms for hand washing, and in for part of the use on their packing house. And then they have an unaltered line for the packing house as well. So that's very simple, very direct, and it works. So why do we go to these? Why do we go to this extent? Well, the savvy farmer is going to want to make sure that their water system is operating properly. And you probably walk your water distribution system in the spring anyway. So this talk is going to give you ideas as to where maybe you want to focus, and definitely write down. So as spoken earlier, this is a requirement of both the MDA and the USDA harmonized GAPs. The produce safety rule covers this not specifically, but under section 112.41, it states, at the beginning of a growing season, as appropriate, but at least once annually, you must inspect all of your agricultural water systems to the extent that they are under your control. So that's including water sources, water distribution systems, facilities, and equipment, to identify conditions that are reasonably likely to induce known or reasonably foreseeable hazards into or onto covered produce and food contact surfaces. All right. So risk assessment is appropriate under MDA, USDA. The produce safety rule kind of implies that you're doing a risk assessment along with your record keeping. So let's go back and look at a couple of scenarios. And this is where you put questions down in the chat. So do your job. All right. We're going to go back to that spring house, and it's encased in a stone and brick protection spring house. But take a look. We've got little windows. So critters can come into the little windows, swim around, and perish. So that's not 100% secure, even though it's in a building. If you're drawing off of a lake or an inlet, you're definitely going to get waterfowl. Yes, waterfowl can foul your water. So that's another thing that you want to consider. There are various ways of preventing or inhibiting waterfowl in a pond, and Angela's probably going to talk about that in August when we cover wildlife. Now, here is a situation that you really want to watch out for. You've got a dairy operation here. You can tell by the ice, because it's winter, you can tell by the ice formation that we're getting surface runoff from those cows. And you know what cows do? They poop. And it's going right into this pond. And on top of that, we have ducks. So we have potential contamination from two wildlife sources. That's something that you'd want to note and potentially mitigate. And then in this picture, we have cattle that have unlimited access to a stream. This is not allowed in the state of Maryland. The nutrient management regulations prohibit this, and they require a 10-foot buffer, foliage buffer that's not mowed, between livestock activities and streams. Remember, the state of Maryland does own surface water, so it's your responsibility to avoid contamination. And in the produce safety rule under section 112.42, one of the subheadings is specifically you prevent trash from getting into your water source. And here you see we've had a breakdown there. You don't want that. All right, let's take a look at some situations where you might have contamination. Here, your wellhead is sitting in a low area and it is flooded, and you don't want that. Well casings are good, but they're only that so good in preventing infiltration. So this operator needs to at least form berms and swales to prevent that water from gathering around the wellhead. And here you've got your well and your piping. All right, but take a look, you've got all of this weedy grass. And if it's bent grass, you know how insidious that can be. That can actually work its way into some of those joints. And where that goes in, so can other contaminants. So you want to keep the area around the well clean and free of vegetation and leaves. Now, this actually is pretty good. They've got all of their machinery up on a cement pad. There's no cracks, all right? Everything is neat and tidy. There's one more thing that they could do, all right? And what is that? Well, they could enclose it. And if they want to go for a harmonized GAP plus, where biosecurity starts to be one of the criteria, they would not only house it, but they would keep it under lock and key. I'm a little concerned about the upturned earth, because if livestock is able to get to that well, we might have an issue there. So let's take a look at a couple of other issues. So this rope is used for the convenience of pulling the well up out of the casing. And that's very fine, well and good. But what it's done is it's interrupted the sanitary seal right here. So again, you've got a break in the sanitary seal, and you can get infiltration there. Here you've got a missing bolt on your wellhead, and again, a break in the sanitary seal. So when you inspect your system, these are a couple of the things that you want to look at your wellhead. Make sure that they're not problems. Or a cracked wellhead would be another issue, or a cracked casing. Those would be things that you would look for. All right. So here we go. We've got the equipment. I don't see that it's on a pad. It might be. I just can't visualize it. And it's pretty well organized. It's got a fence around it. But it's in the middle of this pasture. So is that a problem? Is that a problem? All right. Well, let's see why it might be a problem. Because when you pump water from a well, it draws the water table down. If the surrounding area has, and here it's improper use of engine oil, which is not generally our issue. But if you've got livestock being housed in that field, you've got fecal contamination here that can be drawn down and into your well. The other situation would be if you had an abandoned well. You think, oh, well, it's sealed off. I don't have to worry about it. But that casing could hold water where microbes could grow, and it can be drawn down into your well. So that would be something that you would have to look at and do some mediation. Now, in the packing house, this operator may be thinking ahead. While he's got the plumber out there, he says, okay, well, let's run this extra line because someday I may want to sink here, all right? But what you have is a dead leg, and a dead leg is going to hold water, and that water can, over time, foster the growth of microbes, increase the microbe population, and it can contaminate your running lines. So, all right. And Alec is throwing me little things in the chat box. You pay attention to it. All right. I can't keep track of what he's doing, which is always good. All right. So when you look at your distribution system going from packing house back into the field distribution, anytime you have water getting out, that means that you have the potential for contaminants getting in. So that's not necessarily a situation that is good. I had to ask Alec what this was because I looked at it and I said, my gosh, what is this? So he told me, and what it is this is a sand filter that has not been properly maintained. And in Alec's words, he says it's well on its way to becoming sandstone. So these are part of your water distribution system that you're going to want to make sure that you maintain so it's fully functional and not a detriment to the system. Now, this is a sketch of a fertilizer injection system. And you can see you've got your well here, your lines coming into your injector, storage tank and injector, and then off it goes into your boom irrigation. And it's really, really important that on these lines you have backflow protection, all right? You don't want any siphoning back into the water source. So this is a pretty complicated system where backflow protection is required right there, all right? But even if you use a simple siphon system and a hydrant, you need a backflow protection device right there. They're cheap and easy to install. They're inexpensive. You can get them at most box stores and hardware stores. Even I can put them on. Well, actually, I am pretty handy. But you don't want that water, that fertilizer water, siphoning back down into your source. So back in the packing house, there's all kinds of jerry rigging that people do, and I do admire their go-gettedness, but sometimes it's going to backfire. So here we have the water exhaust system from some equipment, and they thought they'd be real clever, and they patched it into the main drain. That's nice. What happens if your drain backs up? And now you have contaminated water going back to your equipment. So she seems happy. I don't know about that, guys. All right, so here is another situation that I see frequently. You've got maybe a condensation line being fed directly into a drain, but what happens if that drain backs up? Again, you've got contaminated water going back into your equipment. And oh, the third one takes all. So here you have a garden hose with, I love radiator clamps, they're handy things, but again, tapping into the main drain. What happens if that backs up? So these are do-it-yourselfer type of fixes, but when it comes to food safety, maybe not the best decision on their part. So we've talked about a lot of points along the water distribution line. So what you're going to want to do is you're definitely going to want to write this down. And here is a sample water distribution inspection log. You can modify this as need be for your system. And this can be found on our plant science website. And I've got the URL coming up later. So keeping records. All right. Very, very important. If we have a saying that if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. So that's something you really have got to do. So things you want to keep in your records, in your farm safety plan, definitely. You're going to be contacting a laboratory for water testing. You want to keep their certificates of the methodology that you're using, because there are some that are accepted by the FDA for a produce safety rule. Generally, the labs around here that I deal with are very, very good about having the appropriate testing. Then you're going to want to keep copies of all your water tests. You're going to want to keep your average of your 3 samples under GAP. And we're going to cover this better next month, all right? But you definitely, you don't want your average to exceed 126 colony forming units per milliliter, or one sample can be high as 235 colony forming units per milliliter for contact, and 576 colony forming units per milliliter for non-contact. We'll go over that more next month. You're going to want to go through all of that we went through earlier, a water risk assessment, write it down, and annually review and update as changes in your production schedule occur. If you have something like flooding or storming, something that affects your water distribution system, you're going to want to keep track of that, keep a log of that, and any mitigation procedures that you went through. You're going to want to probably create a water management plan. So this is like an SOP, standard operating procedure, but it's multi-folded, it's multi-leveled, and that is going to you're going to want to train all of your employees who are involved in the various steps of water management so that they stay in compliance with that water management plan. So you're going to want to, so today we talked about reducing your risk and knowing your water source. Next month, we're going to cover choosing your application methods and testing your water. So that will be on July 17th. And I hope that you definitely tune in for that. So Angela's going to put these URLs up on your chat box. For more information, contact our website, and that's the pslaumd.edu extension produce safety. And I keep all kinds of good information on that. We all contributed to that, our plant science food safety group. All right. And there you'll find updates on COVID-19. You'll find all of your record keeping templates and a lot of other good information. And then while you're at it, you might want to subscribe to our weekly newsletter. That again tries to keep you abreast of what's going on in the produce safety world. And I found that a farmer's handbook to the USDA Harmonized GAP Standard version, again, URL here, it's a PDF, is really, really helpful in helping me get my brain around water risk assessment. So I want to acknowledge my collaborators and my contacts. All of these folks are available, not yet, are available to, you can reach out to them. They will help you with all of these issues that I talked about, helping you write a food safety plan and a water management plan for sure. So don't forget to register for next month's seminar. I'll be back, and we're going to be same group. All right. And we will be handling mitigation and post-harvest water, and dealing with your lab, and definitely water testing. So we've got a few minutes for questions. Angela, do we have anything in the chat?
Thank you so much, Carol, for a wonderful presentation. Before we get to the chat, just want to let attendees know that after the presentation today, everyone's going to be receiving an evaluation form, and we really encourage you guys to fill that out. It lets us know how we're doing, what we can add to next month's seminars to make them more applicable to you. So please look forward to that. So with that, yeah, let's go ahead and open up the chat. Anybody have any questions about how to make water system distribution assessments? If any Maryland Food Safety Network collaborators want to add anything as comments, feel free.
Oh, I'm sure they'll tell me where I misspoke. Well, I've got a question. You know, one of the joys of my job is going face to face with farmers. And I can tell you in the last 2 years, it's been 2 years now, that I have worked with my folks at the Plant Science Food Safety Group. And I've seen farmers, all I know is that, boy, they have to juggle so many balls in the air. And how do they do it all? So one of the things that we do as a group, and it's the Food Safety Network, so that's a bigger group, we put on training sessions in the winter, which is supposedly your off time. Yeah, when things aren't quite so happening as they are right now. So feel free to contact us now if you've got time, but also take down some of those contact information for things after the harvest, when we know that, or you know that maybe you need help writing your SOPs, maybe you need help putting together a water management plan, maybe you've had some issues in getting together your distribution system or your water risk assessment. So remember, these webinars are going to be archived. If you don't have time to act on some of these things, just keep that URL handy, and they are up on our food safety group website as well, and they will stay there. Don't tell me I did that great a job, you who don't have any questions. Well, if you're going to be the strong silent types, I don't blame you. Do take down my email, callen12@umd.edu. And if you think of anything as you review in your head what I've talked about, if anything comes up, just drop me an email. I'd be happy to answer your questions.
All right, I'm just waiting on here for one person to answer, put a question into the chat box. I know we can probably find one question that someone has. But Carol, thank you so much. You did a great job explaining how to do a distribution system assessment. I hope that kind of demystifies the process a little bit for people.
Yeah.
How would you recommend someone going about doing a system assessment if they have, you know, on their property like multiple wells and also multiple ponds? You know, someone who uses kind of whatever is at their disposal.
Yeah, and you know, I think when I go to some of my larger holdings on the Western Shore of Southern Maryland, I see that they have multiple ponds. So it becomes a real juggling job, and that's why I really, really like the front part of this particular PowerPoint that Alec and I and Chris put together, because I like that really systematic listing your sources, listing your activities, and then that table that kind of puts them together. It would keep my head on straight, definitely. And things that I've experienced in the field, Angela, I've seen where conditions change suddenly. Maybe your number one pond that you in your organization, your water management plan, is suddenly not providing enough water if we go through a drought. And now you're pulling water in from other ponds that maybe you didn't think, well, I didn't need to test those because, you know, I haven't used that in 5 years. Well, maybe we have a 10-year drought, and suddenly you're having to rely on that source. So I really like the way largely Alec put together that water risk assessment. It's really systematic, writes it down step by step, and uses those tables to bring all of those factors in on one sheet. Would help me get my head straight. So did that answer your question, I hope?
Yes, it definitely did. I certainly agree. And just want to remind everyone, if you need help figuring out what sort of template to use for that, we've got those available on our websites, and that was listed in the chat. All right. Well, if we have no questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar today. Thank you again, Carol, for being such a wonderful presenter and really, really just breaking it down to us. I hope everyone enjoys a really safe weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Next month, July 17th. Tune in.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, Angela.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.